Hi, everybody, and welcome to the fourth in our Lord of the Rings Reread podcasts. This is Vassals of Kingsgrave, and you should be warned that everything that has anything to do with Lord of the Rings is up for spoilers, including the Silmarillion and the Hobbit. So today we're discussing the fourth book in Lord of the Rings, which is the second half of the Two Towers, if that's not too confusing. And this is a subject that was dreaded by our podcasters. I think there was a lot of resistance to read about Sam and Frodo do more walking. But despite that, we have a great group of podcasters. So I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and their podcast device and 5 forum names. So starting with Amanda.
This is Amanda. I'm Middlecylones on the forums.
Hey, Amanda. Next up, Eddie.
Hello, I'm Eddie. Teddard on the forums.
Peter.
This is Peter. I'm Shellfish on the forums.
Tanya.
Hi, this is Tanya. I'm Silence on the forums.
Shane.
Hey, this is Shane. EastTexasDirewolf on the forums.
WhiteRaven.
This is Brett. I'm WhiteRaven on the forum.
And I'm hoping Nadia is still on the line.
Yes, I'm here. This is Nadia, and I go by Nadia on the forums.
And we may or may not be joined by Joanna, JoThirteen from the forums later on. So with that, as we have all podcasted on Lord of the Rings before, and we all know how we feel about the books, I guess we just push on. So over to Peter for the Taming of Smeagol.
We joined Frodo and Sam as they are making their way through the rocky hills of Emil, where we get lots of description of rocks and hills. A Nazgul flies overhead and Frodo is momentarily blinded. The hobbits are able to climb down using Sam's also wonderful Elvish rope. Whoop the fucking do.
Are you angry that we made you read this book again?
It's, well, maybe this chapter, but it's pretty, I mean, Elvish rope, I mean, come on the course by itself. Bullshit.
Elvish stuff is to Peter as Kevin Lannister is to all the girls who were on the last VOK.
The Nazgul flies overhead here and it blinds Frodo, so how do you think that is? Is it like a targeted attack or is it just because he has ring? Because if I recall later on in the Morgul Vale, I think it's Smeagol who gets blinded instead of Frodo.
I have no idea.
No idea, it's just weird.
Alright, moving on. Not awkward at all. During the night, Gollum tries to sneak up on them and throttle them in their sleep, but the hobbits are watchful and are able to capture him. Sam advocates tying him up and leaving him to die, but Frodo vividly recalls a discussion he had with Gandalf about the pity of Bilbo, and decides that Gollum has a part to play for good or ill. Gollum tries to escape, so they bind him with Sam's rope. This causes him considerable pain, for he hates the elves. So, do you guys think that this is sort of a little sloppy writing there, that just copy-pasted the discussion that Frodo and Gandalf had? I think in back again, like here. It just seems a little weird. He has this flashback here.
I feel like it's an important topic and definitely makes sense to bring it up again.
Yeah, I guess it's been like a couple thousand pages since that discussion, so...
Yeah.
I thought this kind of seemed like something that the editor might have put in, like, but I guess you can't be expected to remember that far back. Alright. So, what do you think about the Gollum and the rope? Is it like, how does it hurt him? Because do we get this kind of reaction to Elvis things from other creatures of evil or something?
Yeah, or is it that he has some psychological kind of post-traumatic stress thing? Because he wasn't he? He was tied up and tortured by the elves and Aragorn, apparently. So, because later, when Faramir ties him up, or has the Rangers tie him up, he also has this really kind of like out-of-control reaction to it.
Oh yeah, he had a really bad reaction to the elves treating him nicely. When Legolas was going about what happened to him. Well, we just let him wander about and he went up a tree and come down.
No, but isn't there this thing about, like, didn't someone torture him to get information out of him? Didn't Aragorn torture him?
Well, Aragorn said he wasn't kind, so he might have slapped him around a bit.
Put a fire into him, so I guess he's threatened with fire, but I don't think he outright tortured him, at least physically, but I think the thought that Smeagol recalls here, it's from Barad-dûr when he was a captive there. He talked about his hands, his like poor hands and all that, and he has scars all along his back from being in dungeons of Barad-dûr.
Okay, so do we think it's post-traumatic stress? Do we think it's really elvish magic that he's reacting against, or is it a weird mixture of both?
Well, he's been corrupted by the ring to a significant extent. You know, he's lived such a long life, he's not even recognizable as a hobbit, really. Could that connection to the ring and its corruption, which is connected to Sauron, be the reason the Elvish rope hurt them?
I think that might be because often he's described as having a green light in his eyes, sort of like an evil light, kind of similar to the green light in Smeagol, I guess. And if Gollum had been a man, I guess he would have become a wraith by now, or is that just many rings of power? Would the One Ring do that as well? I mean, I think it's said that Sauron sort of tried to make the Dwarven Ring so that they would make the dwarf into wraiths, but they didn't work, so I guess hobbits can't become wraiths either.
Well, maybe it just takes them a lot longer.
Well, I thought they said Frodo would have become a wraith, like, because he was stabbed by the Morgul.
That's when he got stabbed with the sword.
I guess it might be something like actual, and that's just psychosomatic, because he does sort of get a much more extreme reaction here when he's the Elvish robe than he does at the secret hidey hole of the Rangers, because he says that it burns and it's cold and it bites. Or that I think he's just sort of scared when Faramir's men take him.
Perhaps Galadriel blessed the robe, because I don't like the Silmarils hallowed. So Melkor actually burned his hands to touch them. Maybe Galadriel did a similar thing with elven magic to the robe.
The sun doesn't burn him, does it? He just doesn't like the sun.
Griggs doesn't like it.
This is why we need Beric.
Like that.
Beric forums would know the answer to this. I'm hoping that we taunt him with our shocking lack of knowledge and he's just forced to come onto one of these spells.
Well, I guess it's just inherited stuff that the elves make because the cloaks hurt him too.
Yeah, and there's lots of lines out there like orcs don't want to pick up elvish stuff because there's just something innate in it that they see as being pure that they find reviles them. So
yeah, I think evil creatures just don't like elvish things. Probably as basic as that.
Yeah, Tolkien probably didn't think about it too much. He just said, "Hey, we want to burn the hell. That'd be cool."
Yeah.
All right, to finish up Taming of Smeagol, concerned that Gollum's angry screams will draw enemies to them, they untie the rope. Frodo is able to bind Gollum to him with an oath of service, perhaps using the power of the ring to do this. The more amiable Smeagol persona seems to become dominant. Frodo enlists Smeagol as the guide to Mordor. They finally leave Emmanuel behind them and enter the Dead Marshes.
Yeah, your enthusiasm for that chapter just comes across very strongly, Peter.
Well, I wrote them pretty quickly too, but there's some good stuff in this chapter too, like Sam talking about his uncle Andy who used to make good ropes and that sort of hobbit stuff, but as I said, there's a lot of like descriptions of, a lot of those like insulting names that Sam thinks of himself, but as I said, it just has a lot of those like descriptions of rocks and hills. But you guys want to talk about Gollum in general, because this is sort of the first we meet him in the flesh.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, he's a schizophrenic, traumatized ring bearer, isn't he? I mean, I think it's just it's a wonderful description. I love the conversations he has with himself. I find it so convincing.
It's crazy how he thinks everything is evil, but like himself and the precious and fish, I guess.
Wow.
So I think that the sort of way they depict him in the movies is accurate, like sort of schizophrenia and the way he talks to himself and has to do distinct personalities. I mean, we do get that in the book as well, but maybe not quite to that extent.
I think he's a little too nice in the movies. He's like too cute and cuddly.
He doesn't have that. He's a puppy eyes. He's kind of ugly.
I think maybe there's something to be said for the fact that his performance was so impressive, and maybe Peter Jackson was in love with the technology, that maybe the part grew just because he was so good.
I agree.
It's not that I didn't like what they did. It's definitely a departure. But I enjoy the movies, and I enjoy Gollum's character in them.
I don't know. I think he's quite sympathetic in my reading of the books, but maybe that's tinged by the movies because, there are a few scenes, like, for instance, the clear one for me is when he goes to see Shelob and he comes back and he finds them asleep. And there's this moment of, like, tenderness where he reaches out to sort of stroke Frodo, and then Sam wakes up and, like, throws him off. But that's really lovely. You do get these glimpses of this sad, old, tired hobbit that once was.
That is right after he sold him out to Shelob.
Yeah, but I mean...
I think he actually sort of decides to betray the Black Gate. Sam hears him talking to him when they're resting there, and he sort of comes up with a plan to bring them to her there.
Yeah, and after all,
he's met Shelob years before.
Yeah, and he's been feeding Shelob victims for a long time, so this is just another in the long line, isn't it?
Yeah, that was my interpretation of it.
But maybe we can get into that in the Shelob chapters a little bit more, because you get the history of her and him together. The only other thing I wanted to mention on this chapter is I think there's this really amazing description where when Frodo makes Gollum's sort of swear on the precious. In Sam's eyes, he sees his master sort of newly noble and impressive, and I think it's really quite powerful. And it's interesting to see it from Sam's perspective that he sees. It always reminds me of Sam in A Song of Ice and Fire versus Jon Snow, when Sam realizes that he's becoming like the Lord Commander and he's no longer his friend, and he's this sort of powerful and slightly distant thing. A little bit what's going on in this book between these two.
I think Sam is like just the whiniest character in the books, and he just drives me crazy. I know he's some hero, but it just bothers me. He's always so
Which Sam are you talking about?
Sam Gamgee.
Oh, I wouldn't say he's whiny. I think he has a lot of internalized, like, emotional abuse from the old Gaffer, if anything.
Emotional abuse from the Gaffer?
He's constantly beating himself up over everything. Like, oh, the Gaffer would say that about this thing I'm doing. I'm such a fool. Da 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 da.
He could definitely use a self-esteem boost.
But he has lots of wonderful qualities. He's really loyal. He's really caring. He's very modest. I mean, he's a cool guy, in my opinion.
I just don't like how negative he is all the time. He's very woe is me.
But he's about to march to his death. He's negative about shit he should be negative about, like Gollum.
Yeah.
Well, I thought he was pretty positive sometimes. Like, oh, well, we got to do it. Let's go. Might as well make the best of it.
Yeah, I mean, like when they have that final meal and he kind of like, there's that touching speech, isn't there, where he says, what are we going to do for food on the way back? And Frodo's like, listen, mate, friend of all friends, I don't think we're making it back. And he kind of shrugs it off within a second, like, right, okay, cool, this is what we have to do, off we go.
Part of the reason the rope might have Gollum is because it was made by, in a lot of the elves that were there, saw, at least Galadriel anyway, saw the light of the trees in Valinor. And so maybe it's kind of like the light that later gets used in Shelob. It's like old school magic, and to some extent they woven into all the things they do, and so maybe that's what bothers Gollum.
Okay.
I don't know. It's just a thought. Eric will probably be like, no.
Eddie, you're our Silmarillion lore master. Any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, that's pretty accurate. Cool. As far as I've been said, I think.
Ah, good. Okay. Is Joanna on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Yay! So, are you ready to jump in for chapter 2?
Can I start reading the summary?
Yeah, perfect.
Frodo and Sam keep struggling with Gollum, who seems to be keeping his word about leading them into Mordor. But Sam still mistrusts him and tries to keep a close watch on him. Especially after Gollum keeps mentioning he is hungry and he cannot stand the taste of the lamb's bread, the hobbit. Sam thinks he would be capable of killing and eating him and Frodo while they are asleep, so he tries to keep an eye on him. Eventually, their journey takes them to the Dead Marshes, where they see some strange lights among the mist, and later the faces of the dead. Gollum mentions there was a great battle in that place long ago, and the ghosts of those who were killed have lurked in the Dead Marshes sea. After crossing the marshes, they see one of the ring wraiths who flies close to them and then back into Mordor. By that point, there is nothing but a barren wasteland surrounding them, which makes both Frodo and Sam feel uneasy. During the night, Sam then wakes up and hears Gollum and his Smeagol personality having an argument, with Gollum hoping to find a way to get rid of them and get the ring for himself, but Smeagol wants to keep his promise to Frodo. However, when Gollum notices Sam is awake, he then behaves as if nothing has happened. The next morning, they set out again and reach the Black Gate by the end of the day.
I guess Gollum didn't have anything to eat around there because there were no babies around.
I'd be worried if I was in Sam's place.
Okay, so for me, this chapter is conclusive proof that Tolkien's talking shit when he says this book is not allegory, or in part allegory. Because it's so clearly World War I and the trenches, and his descriptions of the marshes and the decay and the rottenness is just so redolent of Ypres and the Somme. And, you know, this is something he would have seen with his own eyes and lost people, like noble faces there. And I find it very moving to read, actually, especially as we're on the anniversary of World War I. But it's so clearly the trenches.
It's strange that he doesn't really go in too much about it. He just kind of talked about it, glosses over it, then walks on.
Well, you say glosses over it, but the descriptions are about Like there's a lot of very vivid descriptions in this book of rottenness and corruption. But the way he talks about, there's this one sentence I just want to read out. Here nothing lived, not even the leprous growths that feed in rottenness. The gasping pools were choked with ash and crawling muds, sickly white and grey, as if the mountains had vomited the filth of their entrails upon the lands about. I mean, that's amazing. And then the next sentence is, high mounds of crushed and powdered rock, great cones of earth, fire-blasted and poison-stained, stood like an obscene graveyard in endless rows. I mean, that's freaking amazing. So I think there's definitely something very deeply felt going on at base in this chapter, because you don't get description like that, of that power and this, like, all these adjectives, like, spilling over one another of how grim this is in many other parts of the book.
I'm more along the lines of, like, why it's there and who preserved it or why they preserved it. It's something that seems like it would be interesting, but he doesn't really go into it.
Is it revealed anywhere else in any of the wider Tolkien works?
I can remember if it is one of the battles mentioned in the Silmarillion, shocking lack of knowledge.
Well, wasn't the Battle of Daggerland sort of when the sword was defeated last time? That was near the Black Gate was. So I guess there would have been battles around there, and I guess they say that the marsh sort of grew in time there, and it wasn't always so wet. What do you mean about, like, who preserved it? Like, do you mean the candles and the corpses in the marsh, or what?
Yeah, it feels like there's some kind of magic there that is, like, preserving well, not necessarily preserving the land, but preserving the bodies and lighting the candles, and it never really explains where it comes from or how it got there, which is fine. I mean, the mystery is nice, but it's just weird because it's somewhere he usually explains himself.
I think that's, at least Frodo assumes that it's Sauron's power that's doing that, because when Faramir tells him about seeing Boromir in the boat in Anduin later on, Frodo says that might have been a trick of the enemy. Faramir says something like, no, he wasn't foul, or something, that he looked peaceful and all that. I guess in The Hobbit, Sauron is called the Necromancer, so I guess it's sort of like death magics might have been his thing. Certainly Minas Morgul.
What's, like, technically, what is it that's drawing for, like, if you fall into these marshes, like, with these bodies, like, what happens to you?
Yeah, you drown and become another corpse, I think.
You drown and light a little candle of your own.
Okay, anything else on this chapter?
A little bit here.
Oh, by the way, Tolkien writes in one of the letters that the Dead Marshes description is based on his experience in the World War, so he's not denying that or anything.
Oh, okay, so he did fess up.
He has written stories that are rife with allegory before, so he is known to it.
Yeah, okay. Did anyone else find it really cute that when Gollum, like, has these visions of himself with the ring, like, it's a really petty vision. He just sees himself with loads of fishes to eat 3 times a day. Like, that's as far as his imagination goes. Like, when I have this hugely powerful weapon, I'm just gonna have fish, man. It's like, it reminds me, I don't know if any of you ever watched Blackadder, the British comedy, the historical comedy. And there's the character Baldric, and Blackadder's like, what would you do if you had £1 million? He's like, I'd buy a really big turnip.
I mean, if you think about what's going to come up later with Samwise, when he wears the ring later, which we'll get to, I mean, I feel like he has similar visions about, like, being the greatest gardener in the land.
Yeah, it's so cute.
Maybe that's why the ring doesn't affect.
Yeah, but the thing is, in pursuing this very meager, petty vision, Gollum does some pretty heinous shit, like giving up Frodo to Shelob. It just seems like the process is, like, totally disproportionate to the end.
I love this little bit here, and near the beginning, when the starting to be the end of the night, and Gollum says, "Day is near," he whispered, as if day was something that might overhear him and spring on him.
Deep paranoia, right?
It's so cute. He's afraid of the day.
Alright, on to chapter 3 then?
Alright, the Black Gate is closed.
Yeah, finally some cool
This is, really? I thought there wasn't much here.
Wow.
I mean,
the lack of engagement is pretty overwhelming on this podcast.
Yeah, actually, was it book 4 we're in? This is book we're in.
This is book 4.
4, right. It wasn't as bad as I remembered. There is actually some interesting stuff in here after these first 2 or 3 sections.
Well, for me, the beginning is just so slow. I mean, sort of reminds me of something you said, Dino, on the first Feast Dance Reread podcast, that relating to Danny's chapter, that it's hard to write sort of a character being tired without tiring the audience here. I mean, definitely feel that you sort of feel Frodo and Sam's exhaustion here when they're just trudging all along, and the sort of relief when they get to Ithilien and sort of have a little break with Faramir is really palpable. You really need that after all that sort of walking and trudging along in these terrible places. And then the last third of the book is like a horror story, really.
Yeah, but
So
it's
interesting.
quite claustrophobic as well. The first 3 or 4 chapters when it's just the 2 hobbits and Gollum, or the 4 of them, Gollum, Slinker and Stinker. It's just like it's so enclosed, and like you said, as soon as you see some men and some Haradrim, you're like, thank Christ for that.
Frodo and Sam and Gollum enter Mordor, become the Black Gate, and there is a very good description as being put in the notes here of the Black Gate. It's really just a big gate, though.
That's like saying the ring is just a big shiny ring, though. And the Black Gate is awesome. It's like the wall. It's like imbued with magics and evils and craziness.
Let's see. The rock was bored in 100 caves and maggot holes. There a host of orcs lurked, ready at the signal to issue forth like black ants going to war. Okay, there's like a sentence, but a good description.
Yeah, awesome.
That's a big gate. Let's decide what they're going to do now. They don't really have a plan. Frodo will not be deterred. He's going to apparently just walk up to the gate if there's not another way in, which doesn't seem very smart to me, or to Sam or Gollum. Gollum starts freaking out, and then he reveals, oh, wait, there's another way. And naturally, Sam and Frodo are like, whoa, why didn't you say something before? And Gollum's like, well, I didn't know what you were going to do before. And it's kind of a humorous exchange dialogue there. Let's see, while they're still discussing, the Easterlings arrive, or at least they get sight of them. They hear their war drums and catch sight of their spears, so they kind of cower for a little bit and hide out. Let's see, Frodo threatens Gollum, because Gollum slips up and says, hey, you could just give me the ring. And Frodo kind of shows kind of got some steel in his spine. And like the first chapter, Sam is very impressed. And he said he's heard Sam thinks about how he always knew his master was wise, but that he's got a newfound respect for him. They didn't know he could be that hard when he needed to be. Then the debates more about whether to trust him and whether his back door or shortcut would not be a trick or a trap. They think it over through the night. Sam sees a ring wraith, or several ring wraiths flying off in the sky. More men arrive to enter Mordor for Sauron's armies. Gollum describes them and Sam asks if he saw any Oliphants. And he reads a poem about the Oliphants, which are elephants, or prehistoric elephants. And then Frodo decides they're going to try Gollum's way. And that's about it.
Are elephants just elephants? Aren't they like mammoths and shit?
Well, that's a prehistoric elephant.
Yeah, they sound more than mammoths.
I think they're bigger than the regular elephants. They say they're like really, really huge. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think it's interesting in this chapter that Tolkien gives us the first hint of like how the timing of this book is fitting up with the timing of the other book. So he's like, this is the point of the Voice of Saruman chapter. And by the way, in case you think Gandalf's being a douchebag having left these guys, he is thinking about them all the time, which is nice. Like, he makes a point of telling us that they're in Gandalf's thoughts, which is good.
Very great when Sam is here, like, Mordor, but when he starts chanting the poem, he puts his hand behind his back and it's like supposed to do. He does that sort of thing that hobbits are hobbits, no matter where they are. It's sort of their spirit endures.
Yeah, which is nice.
Isn't this the chapter where there's a bit of foreshadowing? I think Frodo says, oh, if you, by the power of the ring, if you take this ring from me, I could command it to cast you off into the precipice. And it sort of happens.
I feel like an idiot because I read that yesterday. I totally didn't pick up on it.
Well, Frodo says, if you try to take it, I'll put it on and I could command you to jump into the precipice and you would do it. He's just threatening him not to try to ever take the ring. He says, don't ever ask for the ring again. It's lost to you forever. And then, he says, if you try, I could put it on and command you to off yourself, basically, and you would do it. So just forget about it.
Do you guys think that Frodo could do that he's sort of mastered the ring enough so he could compel someone to kill themselves with it?
Well, I think his argument was the ring had mastered Gollum, so since he was the owner of the ring, he could order Gollum about.
That if he tried to take the ring would break him.
Maybe he should have said that while Gollum was biting his finger off.
I think it certainly does seem like Frodo is sort of growing into the ring he's sort of gaining some measure of power over it because he is able to command Gollum with it, and he sort of grows into a kind of a lordly figure there. And I think in the Morgul Vale he also kind of asserts his will over the ring, I think, much more than he would have in the... go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you think it could be the other way around? That maybe that's the ring influencing Frodo?
Trying to convince him that he can control it?
Or just giving him power, making him more willing to use power?
Well, it's kind of the way the ring works. It just kind of like makes you think that you can control it and you'll be okay and everything's going to be fine. You're just doing it for this, or just doing it for this. But while you're doing that, it actually does great evil through you.
It's a classic kind of parallel to addiction, right? Like every addict believes they're not an addict, they can control it, they're in charge of it, but really it's in charge of them.
I mean, how much power does the One Ring actually give you? I mean, what
depends on who uses their own power.
Yeah, it depends.
I think something that Rudolph points out pretty early on is that if you were to bear the ring, it could do greater evil through him because he has the power that he has, and I feel like it magnifies what power you have to have as a person, adding thing into them, because it's part of Sauron that was put into the ring in the first place. And like his will to dominate. So it's what kind of things can back up your will to dominate, I guess. Like, Frodo can't do magic, but Frodo can be, like, powerful in other ways.
Well, when he thinks about it, he's like, I could dominate you with this ring. Just like Gollum, when he's like, I could take the ring and I could have people bring me fish. So it's like he wants to dominate people in a different way. Even Boromir is talking about how people would follow him. If he wore the ring, then the men would follow him into the war and they could win.
And the dangerous thing about the ring is it always gives you a vision of yourself that's essentially good, as a great and noble leader, right? I mean, people see the ring as something that gives them charisma. It's not something that makes them evil tyrant. It gives you an image of your best self, so you think.
So you don't think...
I wonder if the ring would get to an evil person.
I think they would just dominate what they do.
What kind of visions would they have? Just pure greedy visions? I guess that's what Gollum has, right? Just greed.
Well, what do you think would have happened if Saruman had gotten the ring? Would he have been able to sort of supplant Sauron and become the next sort of Dark Lord?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think they take it as a given, sort of, that if Galadriel or Gandalf were to take the ring, they could do that and become the next Sauron. Could they sort of replace Sauron's power in the ring because it's like a part of his soul, isn't it? So would it always be part of Sauron?
The Horcrux.
Yeah, it is a Horcrux.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't Sauron then just sort of rule kind of through, or like make Saruman into a sort of Sauron? I mean, ultimately, is he still the one who's in control? Because the ring is him, like, it's his soul in that ring, right?
Yeah, a great deal of his power. And he wouldn't be able to be destroyed. Like, he'd still have that Horcrux or whatever to keep him, like, from being ultimately destroyed.
Any other thoughts on Chapter 3?
Yeah, the hard part of this chapter for me was just Sam standing up to recite that poem about Oliphant.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that they talk about how some hobbits would go so far that they would bring tales back of Oliphants. I mean, hobbits are supposed to be really like homebodies, that they never go anywhere, but they must have gone real far if some came back with tales of Oliphants. I mean, to Harad, that's like...
No, I think they call it a Bree talk. So I think they just went to Bree and heard what other others are saying, and that was far enough for them.
They went all the way to Bree and heard from travelers.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
Well, there was still the Northern Kingdom at the time, like, when that could have, like, there would have been a lot more trade, because there was, Minas, I forget the name, Eddie, what's the name of the northern city? There's Minas Tirith, and then there's...
Honest.
That's it, yeah. So, I mean, at the time there was a lot more Western, like, a lot more trade happening in the north, closer to Hobbiton and the Shire, before the Witch King, came in and wrecked.
Okay, on to Chapter 4, which I think is Amanda.
Alright, it is. Okay, so Chapter 4, which is called Of Herbs and Reread. Samwise, Frodo, and Smeagol rest until nightfall and then begin walking again across the barren countryside until they get near to Ithilien. They travel through the evening into Ithilien, which is described as Ithilien, the Garden of Gondor, now desolate, kept still, a disheveled dryad love. Throughout the unseen beauty of the land, reminded of the enemy's role through crudely carved symbols of the eye on rocks and trees. Sam finds evidence of the slaughter of men, and it's described as a ring still scorched by fire, and in the midst of it he found a pile of charred and broken bones and skulls. The swift growth of the wildfire, Nicolantine, and trailing clematis was already drawing a veil over this place, dreadful feast and slaughter. It was not ancient. And that made me think of the Red Wedding, even though it wasn't anything like that. It was probably just orc eating. So just thinking about the return journey from that room and how you think we're able to do it, they march and find a place of rest, and he just starts thinking about meals. He asks Gollum to get food fit for a hobbit, and while Gollum's gone, admires the beauty of Frodo's sleeping face with its worries removed with rest. Gollum comes back with the rabbit, asks him to go and get a bunch of water. Smeagol returns again and realizes that Sam intends to stew the rabbit. He's profoundly disturbed. Sam refuses to go get herbs for Sam. Sam finds herbs and he cooks the stew, and Mr. Frodo awakens. I'm happy about the fire and enjoy the stew. The smoke in the fire kitchen, and the hobbits are discovered by 4 rangers in Zillion, including Faramir, captain of Gondor. Frodo disavows Smeagol, naming him a chance companion because he had wandered off, but asks for mercy for him. He introduces himself and Samwise, gives a brief explanation of their journey, including their companions, namely Boromir.
Do you guys not think it's... I mean, I know that we've criticized people like Aragorn who traipse through other people's lands and don't introduce who they are and make a big deal of being all shifty and then have to show a sword to sort of then, quieten people down. So I'm very appreciative that Frodo just in a straightforward manner announces who he is and who Samwise is and who Gollum is. But why does he, totally unbidden, start telling this random dude all about Rivendell and the Fellowship and naming who was part of it? Isn't that just really kind of like people telling Saruman stuff they don't think they should be telling them? I mean, it's just weird.
I think part of it might be Faramir. They explain him as having power. Like when he's talking to Gollum, he makes Gollum give him answers without really pushing too hard. And maybe Frodo just senses in him that there's goodness or something like that.
I mean, Sam later says he has a sort of Gandalf-y type touch to him. I never thought actually it was anything magical or wise in Faramir. I just thought it was Frodo just being really credulous. And it's always annoyed me. Sorry, but...
No, it is very strange. I mean, is it possible that part of it is related either to his relationship, his close, tutelage with Gandalf whenever Gandalf's in town, or just the possibility that... Did Boromir... I can't remember, but did Boromir ever mention Faramir? I don't know that.
I think that's a symptom of the way Tolkien writes. He just keeps going and then adds in a brother later because he needs fun. I mean, when he thought of Aragorn as the shadowy guy in the Bree, he didn't exactly know who he was when he invented him.
Wasn't Aragorn originally going to be a hobbit called Strider or Trotter or something? Trotter.
Yeah, Trotter or something.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I thought it was strange that the hobbits are hiding and the men show up and they're around here somewhere. And then they just jump out with their swords like they're going to do something to our fully grown men. They should have just tried to hide or run away.
Yeah, it's so equivalent to Aragorn going orc hunting 3 people against 1,000 orcs.
I think they'd have a better chance.
For men, I thought that they just knew they were surrounded and they just sort of knew that they couldn't escape, so they got up and drew their swords.
It just seems like the whole thing was a little bit too easy. Maybe they were just so pissed off of walking on their own. They're the reader, screw it, let's give ourselves up and have some nice conversation and some meat and meat.
Maybe it's just because Frodo and Sam have been traveling around for a really long time. They pretty much only had each other and Gollum to talk to. Maybe there's something about meeting another person to talk. If you haven't talked to anyone in a long time, you're more likely to open up, I guess.
Yeah, maybe it's just something as simple as common human nature.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything special about Faramir other than maybe just being nice and trustworthy.
Faramir does have a line when he's talking to Frodo and Sam after he talks to Gollum, and it says, and after that phrase is basically, I couldn't read or I couldn't infer, he was hiding things in his mind that kind of implied that, I don't know, I thought it was strange, it kind of implied that he was more than just a keen observer.
Is there anything in the wider literature, like after the events of this or before, that Faramir's doing anything particularly kind of witty?
They're saying that he's a lot like Denethor and that he can kind of see into the hearts of men. And Boromir wasn't like that, and I think that's kind of what is happening there.
You see, now this makes me really suspicious because, a lot of Denethor doing that is Denethor using the Palantir, and there's this line I'd never picked up on before I did the reread this time, which is when Faramir basically says goodbye to the hobbits, and he says, maybe one day we'll sit and chat about what really happened, and then he refers to the Seeing Stones of Numenor. He says, maybe that will happen in the time of the Seeing Stones of Numenor, and it makes me think, does he know and potentially even use the Palantir? I mean, it just seems weird that he casually drops knowledge of them into conversation, as if everybody says goodbye in this way.
I think it might be just sort of the language and the culture. Denethor probably kept the Palantir pretty close to his chest to the rest.
But everyone knows they exist. They're like a common farewell.
But Gandalf didn't remember them.
Okay, here's this part I was talking about, where Frodo and Faramir are talking about Gollum and whether or not to trust to Gollum the shortcut or whatever. Faramir says, I do not think you are holden to go to Cirith Ungol, of which he has told you less than he knows. That much I perceived clearly in his mind. Do not go to Cirith Ungol.
I mean, it just makes it feel to me like he sees things.
I mean, they
Well, he did
imply
have
that they're
dreams.
Boromir had the dreams also.
Boromir had
Yeah,
one,
but
but Faramir had like 7.
Well, they do have a lot of Westernese. The students, they have the sort of Numenorian blood as well, and I think Aragorn has sort of the gift of foresight that his mother had it too, or grandmother or something. So I guess there might be something sort of magical in the sort of their blood or something.
In fact, he kind of admits it. So this is the final sentence of The Wind in the West, where Sam says, "You remind me of Gandalf," and Faramir says, quote, "Maybe you discern from far away the air of Numenor." And then in the next chapter, the final line is, "He rose until that time or some other time beyond the vision of the seeing stones of Numenor fell well." So yeah, there is something a little bit otherworldly about this dude.
This one line about Faramir, it says his life is charmed or fate spares him for some other end. What's that about?
I have no good thoughts. Okay, some people are IMing saying, have we covered what would happen if Faramir went to Rivendell instead of Boromir? Which we haven't, so maybe we should. So, Eddie, over to you.
What would have happened, because I don't think we get told that till the next chapter, but Faramir had the visions and the message to go to Rivendell about 3 or 4 times, so Boromir had his one. So what would have happened if Faramir was allowed to go to Rivendell and be with the Fellowship?
Well, he wouldn't have attacked Frodo and Amon Hen, so presumably Sam and Frodo might not have left to go to the east, and maybe he would have gone to Minas Tirith, and then the ring would have ended up with Denethor. So,
or he went east and he would have ran into Boromir, and Boromir would have taken the ring.
All roads lead to Minas Tirith, basically.
But Boromir attacking is what spurred Frodo to leave off by himself. So why would he have left?
Exactly, he wouldn't have
Faramir
done.
was
He would have just stayed with the Fellowship and gone all the way to Minas Tirith, right? So.
Before that he was troubled because he had to leave them at that point, but he didn't know how to do it.
Oh, so you think he would have found another reason to leave them?
I don't think he would have just left them.
Well, wasn't the plan for Frodo to go east, and Boromir was going to go back to Minas Tirith, and Aragorn was deciding, like, well, which way? I don't know which way to go. I want to go to Minas Tirith, but I think with Frodo.
I think the difference is that Boromir was always just joining them up until the point their paths split, and he would go to Minas Tirith, and Aragorn wanted to, but would have gone with Frodo to be loyal once Gandalf was dead. Whereas I think Faramir, who has more perception of what's really going on here, probably would have gone with Aragorn and Frodo to the east, maybe?
So the whole Fellowship probably would have...
Yeah, so then the whole Fellowship would have gone east, but Theoden wouldn't have been roused, the Ents wouldn't have been roused.
Never would have got the army of the dead behind him.
Did Gandalf go to Rohan because of the Fellowship was there, or was he going that way anyway?
I mean, after he got resurrected.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Gandalf the White would have gone to rouse the Ents if he didn't realise Merry and Pippin had already done it, because he obviously knew that he needed to rouse people. Yeah, maybe he would have done it regardless.
But the Corsairs would have still come up the river and massacred the Gondorians, even with Rohan, if it hadn't been for Aragorn going through the path of the dead and getting the dead to follow him.
Yeah, the Corsairs of Umbar wiped them out. There were so many of them.
Yeah, but I think it's important Gollum here because it seems that he's sort of been preserved by some higher power for this purpose. I mean, I don't think even Aragorn or Faramir would have known a way into Mordor. Aragorn, he has been on missions there before. You can read in the appendices that he has gone into the east and into darkness, but I don't think he's ever been to Mordor or would know the routes in the mountains or anything like that.
Faramir knows the way. He actually told them which way to go.
So what does he know
there's a
about
line.
the stair?
Well, there's a line where when Gollum is telling them about the stair, they say Gollum doesn't know the name of it and Frodo doesn't know it, but Aragorn, if he was there, could have told him the name was Cirith Ungol. So he knows something about it.
I think Faramir knew about the way into Mordor via Cirith Ungol, but wouldn't have taken it because he knew about Shelob, right?
Well, they knew there was some sort of terror down there.
Yeah, they didn't necessarily know Shelob because Shelob doesn't leave a lot of people.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely true because, I mean, Faramir told Frodo, just don't go there, right? So I don't think he would have willingly gone there with Aragorn.
I don't know, maybe Aragorn, he's like, I can kill a big spider, look at this sword.
I think what Aragorn would have done is, because he's shit at making decisions, would have said to Frodo, I don't think you should go. Faramir will do whatever I tell him because he acknowledges my leadership and my claim. But you are the ring bearer, you make the tough choice, and then I can just moan about it afterwards. And then Frodo would have sat on the ground and had a think and said, well, you know what, it sucks, but that's the only way in, so let's go. So they would have gone in. There you go.
I still feel like some of the men might have been tempted. I feel like Boromir's death is important because Boromir reveals part of the weakness of men, and how I feel like ultimately, even if Faramir is able to resist being around the ring for a very short amount of time, it doesn't necessarily mean that him or Aragorn, if they, in this alternate scenario, wouldn't ultimately be tempted in some way, especially as they get closer to Barad-dûr.
Although, in fairness, Faramir's pretty close already, and he seems to, we can discuss this in the next chapter, he seems to not want the ring. So, I mean, maybe...
But it hasn't really had time to work on him.
Also true.
Yeah, because they were traveling with the ring.
The fact that Boromir fell to the ring, that kind of sort of influenced Faramir's decision not to go after it.
Yeah, but actually when you read closely the next chapter, he rejects it before he realizes Boromir fell to it, and even then kind of says, yeah, I guess, now it's ironic that I really do have to reject it. But when Sam praises him for rejecting, he says, well, it's not really praise because I just never really desired it, so it wasn't a big deal not to take it. Make of that what you will. But I'm skipping ahead, actually. We should let Amanda finish this chapter.
Where were we? Oh yeah, so Frodo tells them the rhyme, but he doesn't reveal what Isildur's Bane is or where it is, saying it's just a mystery that hasn't been revealed yet, essentially. The Rangers say a bunch of unkind things about the Haradrim, and Faramir leaves them on guard. Then the Haradrim and Rangers battle, basically, and a man falls dead near Samwise, and it's another one of those Tolkien World War I views of a person who's died, and there's a really good quote. He wondered what the man's name was and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies had led him on a long march from his home, and if he would not really have stayed there in peace. And then a giant elephant runs through the field and stands amazed. And after that, they talk briefly with the Rangers, and Mablung, the Ranger, tells them to rest. And that's the chapter.
I love that description of, that must have been so World War I when you see a young kid killed opposite you who looks like you, who was conscripted, and you wonder, what the hell are you both doing there? Really moving.
It's come up in the past, the issue of Tolkien and race, and I feel like this whenever this comes up for me, I always point to this chapter and this interaction with Sam, because I feel like that's Sam's view. Sam, what he says is Tolkien's whole view of war to some extent. It's just these unfortunate people who are in the same place.
Absolutely.
Who are battling.
Yeah,
Did you have anything to say about elf warfare?
About what, sorry?
Oh, I know that you tend to talk about Rome Total War type things, and there's with the Oliphants.
I love Oliphants. I play Rome Total War. I love armoured elephants. That's all I have to say. I always recruit armoured elephants, even though they're more nuisance, because basically they run amok, and you have to carry a stabby thing to kill them when they run amok. But they're awesome. That's it.
Is the Oliphant a word that Tolkien made up? Anybody know?
Ah, good question.
I think it's just corruption of elephant.
Kind of like Zorses.
There's one for you, Vic.
Tolkien, I was just saying Tolkien didn't come up with that word. Oliphant is the Middle English word for it.
Good knowledge.
I'm glad we're on the same page, Nadia.
Is there some wikiing going on here?
Oh, yeah.
What were you saying, Peter?
It's interesting how the said here, or at least implied that Sam thinks that the Haradrim and the Easterlings were sort of coerced into going to war for Sauron. And that they're not really evil at heart. I mean, I guess you don't have a lot of evidence for that. There's the two blue wizards that supposedly went into the east, and I guess they are said to have sort of staged rebellions and uprisings there, so that there wouldn't have been so many troops for Sauron. But I guess this is the closest view we have of the Haradrim as people in this book. Like you get when Theoden fights them in the next book, but it's not a whole lot. Sort of a similar situation as with the Dunletings in Rohan, when Saruman sort of lied to them and sort of take them on to attack Rohan. It's the Haradrim, I think, here.
What incentive does the do the Haradrim have a beef with Gondor? Why should they go to war? What would he have told them or promised them to make them go to war?
Well, there are wars afterwards with Gondor and Harad, because I think in the appendices, Éomer and Aragorn ride south a lot to like the Harrowing. So there might have been historical stuff. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, okay, so it's an ongoing thing.
Well, I think it said somewhere in this book that there was trade between them at some point, Gondor and them, but it was never friendly, and it eventually just became hostile, the relationship.
I think when the Númenóreans first came to Middle-earth, they sort of colonized that area of Gondor, and near Harad, that's sort of the very southern border of Gondor. And those weren't necessarily sort of good Númenóreans. Some of them were the black Númenóreans, which were evil. And I guess they sort of founded Umbar, the Corsair city. And I guess the Haradrim sort of served them there. I mean, I guess I'm not entirely sure who the good Númenóreans are. I guess they are the ones that sort of rebelled and didn't want to attack the elves in the Untitled Lands, but that's Silmarillion stuff, I guess.
Okay, anything else in this book?
No, I'm good.
We now get to the chapter for which I engineered this whole Lord of the Rings reread. Yay. I'm so in awe of Faramir. So, chapter 5, The Window on the West. Returned from battling the Harrowgrim, the Rangers of the South encircle Frodo, and Sam looks on unobserved as at the Council of Elrond, as Faramir questions Frodo further. Frodo asserts that Isildur's Bane doesn't belong to him, but if to anyone, then to Aragorn rather than Boromir. The return of the Sword of Elendil gives the Rangers great cheer, but Faramir says he'll need proof. When Frodo tells him that Boromir will attest to this when he reaches Minas Tirith, Faramir finally reveals that Boromir is dead and was his brother, which is also quite Gandalf-y behaviour. Sam angrily defends Frodo against implied charges of treachery, but Faramir sharply puts him in his place, which is hilarious. We also learn that it's 11 days since Amon Hen, so that Book 4 is now overtaking Book 3. On hearing that the Fellowship journeyed through Lothlorien, Faramir asks, "What did she say to you, the lady that dies not? What did she see? What woke in your heart then?" referring to Boromir. So it's like he already knows in his heart that Boromir was tempted, and he knows that Frodo knows he knows, kind of. As they speak in private, Faramir admits that Boromir had long wanted the stewards to become kings, and that when pushed to it, he might have turned against Aragorn. He's also figured out that the Thing, in quotes, is a great weapon fashioned by the Dark Lord, and reveals that Boromir pushed to go to Rivendell, already tempted maybe, in contrast to the movie. So is it my memory, or is it that, did Boromir say that he thought Faramir should have gone to the rest of the Fellowship, but that his dad made him go? Or is that the movie that I'm thinking?
Yeah, Boromir told the rank to go up when they were talking about it. Boromir was like, "I'll go because it's my place as the eldest or whatever." Yeah, in the book.
I think he said he was hardier, so he managed the journey better, or something like that, to that effect.
So it's almost like Faramir's implying that at that very point he realised what was going to happen, and that basically Boromir was going to fall. Okay, and then we have this really amazing speech where Faramir claims he doesn't yet know what the Isildur's Bane is, and I'm just going to read it because I think it's the most amazing speech. "But fear no more, I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her, so using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. For myself, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace. Minas Anna again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens, not a mistress of many slaves, nay, not even as a kind mistress to many slaves. War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Númenor, and I would have loved her for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom." I mean, that's just amazing. That's why we read fantasy, all that high colour and just the wisdom and the restraint. It's so beautiful, and I just don't know how you can't just fall in love with Faramir at that point.
It doesn't sound as if I read it in my head. It depends when you read it.
How do you feel about Faramir in the movies? Because he's my favorite character in the book, and I just really don't like what they did with him in the movies at all.
I mean, I don't mind him in the movie because I think he's a good actor, and I think it makes sense in the context of the Boromir-Faramir Denethor relationship they set up in the movie. It's well written and it all makes sense. It's totally different to the books. In the books, he is the one man who resists. He's very noble. He perceives very clearly what's happening. And again, it's all the way through the movies, they take agency from people and give it to the Fellowship. Treebeard can't decide to go to war. He has to be tricked into it by Pippin and Merry. And here it's Faramir can't just be a good man. It has to be Sam persuading him and finally seeing the Nazgul. So, yeah, you're right. It's totally different.
Yeah,
After you read that, it occurred to me, maybe the reason that Faramir isn't tempted with the ring is because the ring doesn't see in him someone that it can use very well. Like eventually it would corrupt him, I think, because the ring could corrupt anybody. But his goals aren't things that the ring could easily corrupt. That he wouldn't be a good vessel for him to take over, the ring to take over.
Yeah,
and maybe basically the ring's not interested in Faramir.
Yeah, like if it had to, if all else failed, it probably would try and corrupt him. But Boromir's just the path of least resistance to power, I guess.
Yeah, Faramir doesn't have the will to dominate.
But he doesn't want to. He hates the concept of slavery.
He doesn't have the will to dominate. That's
Yeah.
I think it sort of slightly decreases the ring's power when somebody can just sort of outright refuse it like that. But I do like what Shane said about that he wasn't like a suitable vessel for the ring because he doesn't love the sword for its sharpness or war in itself. Like Faramir talks about how the sort of Rohirrim and Boromir have sort of began to like war as a means to an end. Not as a means to an end, but in itself, that they actually enjoy fighting and all.
But it's almost like he's sort of indifferent to it in the way that, all these people who existed before Sauron, like Tom Bombadil and Shelob, are kind of indifferent to the ring in a way. And it feels to me like Faramir is so high with a capital H, like his ideals are so romantic that he's kind of just indifferent to that kind of petty worldly power that it offers. And therefore the ring's indifferent to him. So to me it kind of makes sense. It's not this... Like a lot of people really attack these books and say that the Faramir character's implausible and that it undermines the whole concept of what the ring is. I just don't get that.
Everybody's different. I think that's basically what he's showing here. Like, if that ring came to the Dalai Lama, he probably wouldn't try to use it to take over India.
Yeah, but he might try and, fuck up China, though.
Oh, yeah, he's like, no, we want our shit up here.
That'd be so awesome. I just had this mental image of the Dalai Lama with, an Uzi. I hope I haven't offended any Buddhists.
Me as well.
Okay. I'm just going to quickly wrap up the chapter, then we can discuss Faramir stuff. After this, the hobbits are blindfolded and led to Haneth Anun, the window on the west. Frodo sleeps, Sam keeps watch, and then plunges his head in water to wake himself, much to the men's amusement. Before eating, the men looked to the western elven home, a lovely hint of their faith and customs. After supper, Faramir gives Frodo Gondor 101, speaking of a people fallen into sterility and despair, and of the alliance with the Rohirrim at Celebrant, and his admiration for this young and valiant kingdom, which I guess foreshadows him marrying a princess of Rohan. He speaks of the decline from high men to Middle-earth, and their alienation from the elves. This prompts Sam to go into raptures about Galadriel in a sort of Gimli-like moment. And he uses this wonderful phrase, "You could dash yourself to pieces on her." And he excitedly reveals that what Boromir coveted was the One Ring, which is a big moment, which I just really love. It's like the Homer Simpson moment of this book. At which point, Sam, which I think shows so much balls, he's like, I've been a doofus, but I'm going to throw you down a challenge to show your quality. And Faramir does. But, as I said before, when Sam praises Faramir for foregoing the ring, he claims, unquote, he had no lure or desire to do other than he had done. So I guess the question I would pose to this fellowship is this false modesty, or is this true?
Well, I guess you could praise him because he sort of does have this reaction when he hears that it is the One Ring, that he says that he has to hold to his word, that he would leave it at the wayside. Obviously, it sort of intrigues him, and he thinks that maybe he should not leave it at the wayside, but because he's given his word, that sort of binds him.
If you found it on the side of the road, I hope he'd pick it up, because if he doesn't, somebody else will, someone who's worse than him and will use it.
So, Peter, do you honestly think if he hadn't given that high noble speech to Frodo and kind of checkmated himself, that he would have then taken it? Do you really think it's as simple as he kind of boxed himself into an oratorical corner?
It's quite that simple, but I think he might have considered it more seriously than that, because he does intrigue him a lot more after he hears that it's the One Ring.
But it kind of feels to me it intrigues him on a more intellectual level than on a practical use of power level. Like, he just wants to know its history, and he wants to chat to Frodo about what happened in Lothlorien. It's almost like he's a book-learning guy. He just wants to go read the Silmarillion in the hidden libraries of Minas Tirith.
It is interesting you bring up him saying that, he almost made an oath there to not take it. In the history of the Middle-earth and the Silmarillion, when you make an oath, you almost have to stick by it. So that's kind of interesting. You make that connection that he already made an oath, and then he's like, I'd like to take. No, I can't take it. I just told you I wouldn't.
in Tolkien, words have power, like Brett said. I mean, if he had broken his oath, he might have become like an oathbreaker, the army of dead, although I guess that's because Isildur cursed them, but they are also very important thing as well.
True.
But I think there's also that thing to consider that it's not necessarily that he wants it for himself, that he feels it is his duty to bring it to his father. I mean, that's emphasized in the movies, but I think you can find evidence for it in the book as well, because he talks about that when he tells his sort of commands that this is doom, and he says that Frodo can go within the borders of Gondor for 1 year or something like that, call it his doom.
I never really thought Faramir took Denethor's authority he takes his authority seriously, like, he gives, Frodo the keys to the city for a year, and then he has to go back and get it renewed, but I don't think Faramir ever thinks, I can't take the ring, or I should take the ring because I need to give it to Denethor, as opposed to the movie when that's all he thinks about, right? He barely even mentions his dad.
Yeah, the book just makes his own choices in the book. Like, he's his own character in the book, and he doesn't, he has his own mind and his own ideals, and doesn't just completely...
Exactly. And the ideals which he explicitly says are not the same as in here he's quite alienated from Gondor. He says, Gondor's this sort of sad, desolate place where warriors are now worshipped above all things, and he feels totally different to that. So he's a real loner and rogue.
Yeah. That's beautiful, the sort of way he talks about, like, the heights would pour over crows and they should become more dear to them than the names of their sons. They gave that to Gandalf in the movies, and I think it's beautifully developed there as well. Yeah,
this chapter has such beautiful language, and I love how Frodo and Sam in Faramir's presence start using really beautiful poetic language as well. I mean, the way Sam describes Galadriel, there's nothing like that in anything else Sam ever says.
I think the last chapter, but I like when Sam starts talking to him, he's like, shut up and let your betters talk here, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but then there's this little hoppity, guy, threatening him and whatnot. It's hilarious.
Yeah, he's just like, you don't know what you're talking about, shut up, Sam.
But don't you think, again, there's echoes of Gandalf, like when Gandalf becomes quite short with the hobbits when he comes back to Gandalf the White. So there's a lot of Faramir that has that kind of Gandalf-y sort of, especially when he lets Frodo go on and on about Boromir, then finally reveals that Boromir's dead. I mean, that's definitely the kind of douchey sort of shit that Gandalf pulls.
Powerful people are douchey.
They're not douchey. They just sometimes withhold stuff to make lesser people look stupid. And purposely, which isn't nice. It's unnecessary.
That sounds douchey to me.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go.
Well, maybe Tolkien's trying to make a statement that people that are wise know when to keep their mouth shut, and as opposed to Sam who just blah blah blah.
Well, Tolkien was a philologist, so it's you got to keep in mind just both with the oath and with this, it's just learned people and words are what has power for Tolkien in his mind. So I feel like that is a running theme throughout the books anyways, of the power of words and an economy, using an economy of words and withholding and sharing.
Yeah, definitely.
Good thing Tolkien never read Martin. Words are weird.
Okay, any more in this chapter, or on to the Forbidden Ball?
Frodo is by Faramir in order to view Gollum twisting by the Forbidden Pool. Frodo's former pity for Gollum is tested by the men of Gondor, who ask if they should slay him. But Frodo holds to the wisdom of Gandalf and of his heart, and explains that Gollum used to bear the ring and that they was his guide. Faramir tells Frodo to get Gollum or they'll kill him. Frodo then goes down to the waterline and tries to persuade Gollum to come with him. Gollum follows reluctantly and becomes a bit pissed when the men of Gondor time up. Gollum's then brought before Faramir, who questions him as to where he's leading the hobbits. Gollum is a bit unforthcoming, so Faramir does his wizard hoodoo on him. It is revealed that he's leading to the Pass of Erethangol. Faramir issues a dire warning about their destination, but Frodo says he has no other choice. Yeah, I'm just gonna read the first line of this chapter, and given the colour of the podcast of Ice and Fire, I think our first thoughts about this are clear.
Right.
Frodo woke to find Faramir bending over him. For a second, old fears seized him, and he sat up and shrank away. Creaking door, anyone?
But creaking door about who? I mean, Bilbo? Who would be creaking?
Bilbo.
But he only went to live with Bilbo when he was already quite old, right?
I mean, it could be he thinks that someone like Faramir trying to take the ring. So not that Faramir creaked his door or anything, but.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't think Eddie's seriously alleging that Bilbo creaked the door, right?
I think he is.
No, that was my first. That was my first thought of the reread since I've been listening to the podcast.
See, this is a problem. Like, reading George R.R. Martin makes you really cynical.
Well, let's go through the information. Bilbo never got married, and now Frodo, he's like a loner, and Sam looks at him and sees him as beautiful. Maybe they brought Sam in. I don't know.
So now it's a pedophile ring.
Things are different in the Shire.
This is so sad. We just had this wonderful chapter with all this high romantic description of, fair queens and shit, and this is where we come to.
Yeah, I don't have much. It's quite a short chapter. I don't have much to say about it.
Yeah, there's not much more.
This is where he gives them sticks. Awesome sticks.
Yeah, but the sticks don't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, they don't shoot.
They didn't give him the sticks on my chapter.
Oh, shit, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you better be.
Should we just get straight into your chapter then? Because, yeah.
I do have one thing to say. I feel so bad for Frodo because he has Gollum and he knows that it's a tenuous thread that's connecting them to Gollum, and he knows Gollum isn't going to take it well, but he has to do it to save Gollum's life, and Gollum will never understand that.
Well, that's on Gollum. Hey, dude, they were going to kill you if I didn't do what I did.
I know it's on
Sorry.
Gollum, but it's just Frodo knows that it's going to go this way, and I feel for Frodo.
Yeah, because he sort of said to Gollum, all right, come this way, all the precious will be angry. Why can't he just say, right, some men up there, they kill you, and they should follow me.
Yeah, but I think you guys are assuming, Gollum's not a rational interlocutor, so...
I think if he had told them that there were men up there, Gollum would run away and they would have shot him. But I love this bit of comedy here when Faramir sort of dismisses Gollum on, go away now, take your fish with you.
I like it when he's like, you can't eat from that pool. He's like, I don't even want the fish.
Okay. On to the next chapter. Let's go to the staves, because they're so exciting.
Oh, good, thank God. Okay, the hobbits wake up, have breakfast with Faramir. He gives them food, staves of Gondor with the virtue of finding and returning. Frodo thanks Faramir and name drops Elrond in his prophecy that they would meet up with help unlooked for, which is a pretty dumb prophecy because any help they're getting is going to be unlooked for. I feel like Elrond just throws out words and then later on he's like, yep, that was a prophecy. I called it. It's like fortune cookies. You will meet someone today. And it's like, oh, told ya.
Thing is with Elrond, if there's a Venn diagram of doucheyness, so on one circle you have elves, on the other circle you have wizards, and then you have Elrond, who's both elvish and wizardy. He has both compartments of the Gandalfy and the Elvish douchiness all combined into one douchey package.
So they blindfold Gollum and the hobbits, and Frodo's like, oh, blindfold me first, so I'll follow in suit, and I guess he does. Before parting, Faramir tells them the way he would go, and he wishes that they wouldn't go that way because he's afraid of what's going to be up there, but they go that way anyway. And Faramir and his boys ninja off into the forest. Gollum calls them evil men, and Frodo chastises him and tells him that don't speak of people who have done you good things, and Gollum doesn't even get it. So then they walk for days in this lifeless, silent land, and the closer they get to Mordor, the more the daylight wanes until it's just dark all the time. Gollum keeps running off and coming back and asking them if they slept well. And then Sam bitches because Gollum doesn't help enough, even though if it wasn't for Gollum, they wouldn't even have gotten this far. They would still probably be stuck in the Dead Marshes. And that's where I have a note here that Sam's a bitch, because he's always whining, bitching about everything. They come to the crossroads of Beren to the south, Osgiliath and Minas Morgul, and the sun breaks through the clouds and lights on a statue that's broken with the head on the ground with orc graffiti all over it. And the head that's on the ground has a flower growing around the brow of the head, and Frodo points out that it's like a crown. And it's kind of gives hope to Frodo that world can recover from the darkness it's under, and it's not everlasting. And that's the end of the chapter.
I thought Frodo was grasping at straws a little bit there.
The fact that the light came through the clouds and kind of illuminated it for him is almost like higher power was showing it to him to boost his mood.
And especially how the flowers grew on the a crown on the statue. I think that wasn't just an accident. It was some kind of magic thing going into that sort of land. I guess still holding dear the kings of Gondor or something like that. It just seems like it wasn't a coincidence.
I just think there are some more words of wisdom from Sam. Where there's life, there's hope, as my grandpa used to say, and need of fitters, as the most phrase used to add.
Yeah, ever the man with the cliche. Should we just push on with Shelob? Because that's like the cool thing at the end of this book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Nadia, save us.
So Gollum gets Frodo and Sam to leave the crossroads quickly, since he says it's not safe to just stay there long. They start to walk away from the crossroads, and suddenly, as soon as they've left behind Ithilien, Frodo starts to feel the weight of the ring again. As they approach the Morgul Vale, they sense that something is watching them, and they see the tower, Minas Ithil. The topmost course of the tower is revolving around first this way and that, and it's just it's like a huge head just looking into the night, watching for any comer. The three just stand there, and it seems like they can't walk away, but then Gollum recovers and he pulls them away. They come to a bridge. They see there's a strange light around them, and suddenly Frodo feels a strange pull that pulls him towards the top, and he starts to cross the bridge. But then again, Sam catches him, and then Gollum leads them away. Eventually, they leave the road through a gap in the stone wall and start heading towards the pass of Kersangor. Okay. Gollum doesn't rest at all. Frodo just wants to sit down and have a rest, but Gollum keeps telling them, no, it's not safe to rest yet. But eventually, it sounds like there's an earthquake, and there's lots of thunder, and then they see the gates opening. The gates of Minas Morgul opening, and an army pours out, headed by the leader of the Ringwraiths. And he, as the army walks out, he stops on his horse and he senses the presence of the ring, and he looks around, but he can't see Frodo and Sam. Even as the king of the Ringwraiths feels it, he starts to, Frodo feels that there is another will commanding him to put on the ring, but then he feels his own will stirring, and he places his hand on the file of the lacquer instead and resists the pressure of putting on the ring. Then they start ascending towards the pass. There's a cleft in the mountainside which is pass of Kersangor, but it's guarded by a tower manned by orcs, and Sam gets really angry. He tells Gollum, you didn't tell us that this way would be guarded, but Gollum says that every path into Mordor is guarded well, and you have to cross in somewhere. And then Frodo and Sam sit down and have a meal, like hobbits always do, and they start discussing about tales and songs, and Sam says somebody's going to make up a song about you, and Frodo says, but I wouldn't have gone far without you, so you have to be involved in the song as well. Gollum comes back a few hours later to find Frodo sleeping with his head in Sam's lap, and he reacts almost jealously. He puts his hand on Frodo's knee, and Sam suddenly wakes up and thinks that Gollum might be going to the ring, and he gives a shout, and Gollum reacts very badly. And Frodo wakes up and he admonishes Sam.
Does anyone think that little cute scene, and I'm the one who defends the friendship between Sam and Frodo against all comers, but the scene where, he's lying with his head in Sam's lap, and it's a little bit dodgy, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
It is.
Sam is fighting Shelob. It says that no animal fought so ferociously to defend its fallen mate or something like that.
Yeah.
But it could be just like pack mate, like mate, in that sense.
Yeah.
That must be it.
But Gollum's reaction to the whole scene is...
He wants in on the action?
And he's really jealous, isn't he?
Nah, in all seriousness, it's just sad. He just looks wary and hobbity, and he just wants genuine human friendship, I think. I mean, it's actually, despite my juvenile Beavis and Butthead reaction, it's a very moving scene.
Yeah, I think, and this sounds like the final straw for Gollum, and Sam wakes up and mistrusts him. Gollum gives up whatever part of Slink there was, and he just becomes Stinker all the way through.
He was already Stinker. He just got done talking to Shelob and said, I'm bringing him by here like in 15 minutes, so get ready. And then, yes, he has this little fraction of a second moment where he's like, maybe I shouldn't do this.
Yeah, but he still does it.
Yeah, but this is the last time we see the Smeagol part of him, right? This is where it ends.
Yeah, this is the last time he's actually caring.
It gives you the sense that if it weren't times of war, that this is a man who could be redeemed. And a scene like this makes me really sad because he ultimately loses. I mean, he gets destroyed with the ring. His addiction destroys him. And I always feel a bit bad for Gollum. Like, everyone else survives. Yeah. The whole Fellowship basically survives apart from Boromir, apart from Gollum.
I don't know. He killed to get that ring, so I don't feel bad that he dies.
And he's eating baby.
Okay, question.
And he's eating baby.
He's eating baby.
I have a question. After many, many years, all of the ring bearers get to cross over to the west, right?
Almost all of them. Sam doesn't.
So, what if Gollum had survived? He was one of the ring bearers. Would he have been allowed to? I don't think considering what Gollum is.
Would. They would have the dragon kicking a string.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily.
The place that was else.
Yeah. I think it would have burned him.
Oh, well, I'm the only one who finds Minas Morgul, like, really cool. Like, the Witch King comes out and he's got, like, a cavalry of black knights. I mean, what are those guys? Are they, like, black Menorians or... I mean, they're horsemen. They're not horses, they have horses. I guess that's where all the black horses from Rohan that this told went. But do we actually see these guys in the field later on?
I don't think we do in the book.
Cavalry.
We certainly don't in the film. But I wish we had, because that's just freaking awesome.
I wanted to ask about the tower. The sort of revolves around looking bloody. So is it like a lighthouse or something like that?
Yeah, it sounds like it, doesn't it? Like the rotating eye.
Yeah, I think the orcs are more sort of technologically advanced than men or elves. They have like all sorts of machines and things to kill people, many people at the same time. So I guess it's not out of the question that they might have like rotating tops of the tower.
They have pretty good medicine too. I mean, they healed Mary like nothing.
Yeah, but it left like a brown scar for him for the rest of his life.
Yeah, well, what you gonna do? He's alive and running.
Cool. Girls, we've got a lot of lore masters on the call. Do you guys want to get into the whole Beren and Luthien thing that's brought up?
Well, I will say that Luthien absolutely destroyed Sauron when she actually fought him all by herself. And that was, just her back when he was full power. Well, when Frodo is captured, like Beren is captured, like Frodo starts singing and then that's how Sam knows where he is. The same as like Beren starts singing and Luthien knows where he is. And then Luthien like blasts Sauron out of his castle and frees Beren, and then they go to get a Silmaril from Morgoth. She just makes everybody fall asleep, and it's like, why didn't they just do this earlier and just kill him then?
Maybe they didn't know it was going to work. I mean, I don't know.
Well, yeah. But Luthien just seems so powerful. It's like, how is this possible? She's too good.
Mother was a goddess, pretty much.
Yeah, I know. But
yeah,
she was my role model.
It's the only semi-happy ending in this Silmarillion.
She's also, I think she's definitely the strongest female character that Tolkien has written.
You mean it's not Toriel? Say something actually specific to the Stirs of Cirith Ungol chapter, which is that it feels like something between Frodo and his relationship to the ring has changed between Amon Hen and now, because it says Frodo feels the call to put on the ring, but he has the will not to. So the quote is, he knew the ring would only betray him. There was no longer any answer to that command in his own will, dismayed by terror though it was, and he felt only the beating upon him of a greater power from outside. So it's like in the old days, Frodo would feel this outside power to put it on, but he would then want to put it on, and he would. Whereas now he's kind of in his wisdom, or as he's become more, not passive is the wrong word, but it's kind of like he's learned how to sort of say no to that. And in this particular case, he clutches the file of Galadriel, and that kind of gives him strength. So I thought that was a sort of interesting, not so much character development, but how Frodo's dealing with the ring.
Yes, that's one question that I've heard people say, that does the Lord of the Rings actually sort of refer to Frodo? I mean, he's just a Lord of a One Ring, really, but does sort of become that. I mean, obviously...
Insofar as he masters his own desire to put it on, I think he's lord of himself. The thing about the ring is it seeks to make a slave of people. It wants to master people and bend people like Boromir to their own will. Like it's what you guys were saying in the chapter about Faramir. It wants to find suitable vessels for its own aims. And it feels like Frodo's becoming lord of himself and that's powerful. Because he
Yeah,
does.
but he does succumb in the end.
Later on,
The
he
crack of
will
doom.
succumb, of course, when he's actually at the point of weariness at the crack of doom. But just here, it feels different. It feels different to every other time we've seen him being drawn towards it and wanting to put it on. It's just somehow different. So I just thought I'd throw that out.
Yeah, I wonder if we are supposed to take it as a good thing that it's his own will, or if it's sort of his desire and his sort of mastery of the ring that's increased. It's sort of if we're supposed to take it as a positive trait or a negative trait.
Oh, that's interesting. I just thought it was positive.
Like-
I never even thought it could be negative.
If he did put it on, he'd probably end up losing it. That's why he didn't put it on. Is that what you mean?
His self-discipline not putting on means that he's becoming someone who would wield it more effectively. Like if you put it on, he'd become more powerful or something. Is that what you mean, Peter?
I mean that he was sort of resisting putting it on for the desire to have the ring for himself and not to destroy it. That's kind of what I mean. One thing about this chapter was the sort of light show coming from Barad-dûr and then from Minas Morgul. But the movies, I thought that was just in the movies, like the big ass like light going into the sky from Minas Morgul that can't often people see that. Nope, it's in the book as well. I'm surprised by that. Seems like a thing that Peter Jackson would do in the movies. But
Not everything is his fault. Any other thoughts on this chapter, or should we push on to Shelob's lair?
Yeah, okay. So when Gollum wakes them up, they think it's the night, but it's actually day, and they can't really tell the difference. They smell an awful stench. They enter the cave, but Gollum doesn't say its name anymore. And Sam suspected from the very beginning. He says the smell can't be good news. They enter the cave, but there is no light, so they have to feel their way along. And the darkness inside is such that it means everything, sound, feeling. But then suddenly they come to a fork, and they don't know whether to take the left path and the right path, and they realize that Gollum is now missing. Sam realizes that something is watching them. They turn around, they still can't see anything, and then suddenly Sam remembers the file that Galadriel had given to Frodo. As the light starts to shine, they see the eyes of Shelob the Great. Frodo realizes that they won't be able to get away, so they stand to fight. And Frodo takes out his sword, and he runs towards Shelob, and Shelob has not seen any light for a long time and retreats. And they run towards the opening and can start to smell the fresh air, but suddenly they're thrown back by a barrier, which turns out to be a large web. Sam has to cut it down, but it doesn't work, so Frodo tries it with Sting, which is an elven blade, and is able to cut through it easily. And suddenly, Frodo, with all his battle lust, starts to run towards the pass of Kerazangor. And Sam is following him, but he's more wary, and he keeps looking back to the tunnel, but then he sees that Shelob is now above the pass and is attacking Frodo. But suddenly he feels clamps their hand around his mouth and neck, and it turns out Gollum has come back. But Sam manages to fight off Gollum and runs back towards Shelob and Frodo, and manages to... He picks up Frodo's sword and the file of Galadriel, which he already had. He cuts off one of the claws of Shelob and takes out an eye, and... Shelob... he puts up his sword, and Shelob sort of impales herself on it. And then Sam eventually gets Shelob to retreat. But then he comes back to Frodo. Oh, sorry, I went into the next chapter, didn't I?
Yeah, that's okay. They kind of merge into one.
Yeah, I didn't even realize.
But Peter might want to see you outside about it.
Yeah, I didn't have it written down. I was just going.
It's like I love the fact that you're like sort of like finally some action. Let's just keep going.
Yeah, it kind of they flow into each other. Well, these two chapters.
Do you want to take over the recap, and then we'll discuss it all at the end, maybe?
Alright, so after driving off Gollum, Sam finds seemingly lifeless Frodo on the ground, and Frodo has been continuing his hobby of being stabbed by new and exotic things off screen here. You see, I thought about like how it got through that he had his mithril coat, but I guess he stabbed him. Shelob stabbed him in the neck, so he didn't have the coat there. And so Sam demonstrates his balls of steel once again, and sort of just picks up Sting and charges this huge ancient horror spider and cuts off a claw and blinds an eye, and then Shelob tries to crush him under her bulk and just drives Sting deeper into herself than any sort of ancient warrior could have done. And then Shelob gets sort of enraged, and as she's about to pounce on Sam remembers the file of Galadriel and pulls it out, and it's brighter than ever now. I guess it's the sort of Sam's heart that makes it sort of blaze. And Sam uses the file to drive Shelob off. A torment Shelob gives her great pain and terror, and she just sort of slinks off into a hole, and Sam chases him, hacking at her all the while.
So does Shelob, she doesn't die though, right? There's this like cryptic line that we don't know what happens in this tale.
No, we don't know if she dies.
I'm gonna guess she dies when, like, everything falls apart down there. It's crushed on a rock or something.
Okay. It's just, I took some sort of delight in the idea that she existed before Sauron and she'd exist after Sauron, and then she'd still be there lurking somewhere.
I kind of imagine Dav or something because she's injured in the past.
That's true. That's true.
Do the mountains actually crumble when Thorin falls? It's just the case.
That's probably just the movie.
Well, not really, right? Because doesn't Faramir, after the events of this tale, go back and rebuild the tower as a fair tower? So
That might be Minas
Maybe he just
Morgul.
put it down and then...
oh, okay, Minas Morgul. Okay, cool. Sorry, wrong time.
Yeah, but it's really close by.
I just think it'd be hilarious if Faramir went back and rebuilt this tower fair and strong and mighty and noble, and all the while there's this like nasty beastie spider underneath that he didn't know about.
No, it seems like it's implied that Sauron doesn't necessarily know that she's there either. She's just kind of like, I don't know, what's the word?
No,
She's squatting.
no, actually.
Yeah,
Occupy Wall
Sauron
Street,
actually sort of...
occupy Minas Morgul.
No, actually, Sauron knows that he sort of regards her as a pet. He occasionally sends captives there and sort of delights in them as she is. But I thought it was beautiful how Sting actually ended up killing Shelob, or actually wounding her or ending her reign or something. I like to think that she died just because of that, because Bilbo names Sting like Sting is my name and I'm Spider's Bane all those years ago.
Exactly.
Now it's
yeah, that Sting is an awesome name for a sword, again.
Yeah.
Well, it's really just a long knife, not even really a sword.
I thought it was interesting, actually. I think we did a poll on the forum of Podcast of Ice and Fire, and the winners were Excalibur and Dark Sister. So Sting didn't make it, I'm afraid, boys and girls.
So, we have some Tolkien lawmasters here, or actually Silmarillion lawmasters. So Shelob is the child of Ungoliath, the sort of ancient demon spider. And is it true that she sort of devours light?
Yes.
Huh?
She devours light. She devours light and spins webs of dark.
So she's like a black hole.
Yeah.
Yes, she ends up killing herself by spinning webs.
Yeah, she gets so angry that she eats herself.
Man, that's deep.
Yeah, so
a lady hot situation.
Yeah, but was the thing in the Silmarillion that Ungoliath actually, that she was older than the world, that she came from the void or something like that? She wasn't actually created by Morgoth.
She was a spirit.
Oh, that's so cool.
She's a spirit of the Maya, but rejects
That's some
everyone
debate.
else.
I don't think there's canon.
Yeah, it hasn't been clearly defined.
Yeah.
Well, she's like almost an equal of Morgoth in that he doesn't really control her. They just kind of get together and go there and do their thing, and then she takes off running, and so to see they go their separate ways. She's never really under his dominion. Yeah. She's just another Maya in the world, kind of like Tom Bombadil, I suppose, just doing her own thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and all the spiders in Mirkwood are actually Shelob's brood. It's kind of cool as well. So what do you guys think about Sam sort of just kicking Shelob's ass here? I mean, it's sort of, I guess it's, can you call it courage really, or is it just his love for Frodo that's his
Isn't it just adrenaline kicking in, isn't it? Like when someone you love is under attack and you get a superhuman crazy courage because it's just adrenaline. I found it quite plausible, actually. I don't think it's him like becoming some crazy hero. It's just that's what people do in those circumstances.
Yeah, the same thing happens with the Watcher in the water at the Gates of Moria.
Yeah. I think what's more courageous is when, because it's not made by adrenaline, when Frodo says, look, we can't run, just takes out his sword and takes the file and says, right, now we charge. That to me is like the really amazing moment, because Frodo's in a way much more pacifist than Sam. Sam's always up for punching someone, especially Gollum, but for Frodo to like take up his arms, I think is a bit more impressive in a way.
Yeah, I agree. That was probably a braver thing to do, especially when they're in the darkness, not in the relative light of the it's a passive character will go.
Exactly. And in a way, I always feel with the films you don't really get that side of Frodo. Like you see a lot of the weary, wise, sad Frodo. You don't see a lot of the courageous, right, when needs must, I also can draw my swords at Frodo.
Yeah, and sort of lordly Frodo, or the wise Frodo you see interacting with Faramir in this book.
He never really comes across as a man to be reckoned with. And he is a man to be reckoned with. He can be perilous. Like, when Gandalf says, well, Aragorn's perilous and Gimli's perilous. But I also feel that in his own way, Frodo's perilous, as is Sam, and you don't really see it.
Yeah, I think something that might have a little to do with his age, actually. His age down in the movies quite a bit. I mean, he's 50 in the book, but I don't know how that sort of relates in Hobbit age. I guess in the movies, Bilbo is 50 as well, and Martin Freeman is he like in his 40s or something?
I always thought it was kind of like 30s is kind of like your teenagers, isn't it, for Hobbit? So he's maybe the equivalent of like early 20s, like for us, maybe?
I don't know. I think it sounds almost even when like Bilbo's 111, but he's exceptionally old for a Hobbit. So I don't know if it's really. I think it's kind of like people.
I think they're a little bit longer lived because the old Took lived a very long time as well. And I'm not sure about
Lobelia Sackville Baggins got past 100, didn't she?
Yeah, and she was pretty.
All of them got after 100.
Yeah, I haven't read the Tale of Years in the appendices, so I don't know how long Merry and Pippin and Sam live, so I guess that might be an indicator as well.
Aren't Hobbits supposed to be like grown-ups when they're 33 or something? So
yeah, yes, that's a good.
That's sort of the beginning of Lord of the Rings, right? He turns 33, so he's coming of age. So at 50 you wouldn't be a human 50-year-old, you'd be in your, I don't know, late 20s maybe, I guess.
You'd be more than man grown.
Oh, okay, any more about Shelob? So Sam returns to Frodo and he cuts the webs from him and tries to wake him up, but Frodo doesn't stir. And Sam recalls the visions he had of Lorien in the Mirror of Galadriel, and there's this sort of beautiful passage here. And then black despair came down on him, and Sam bowed to the ground and drew his grey hood over his head, and night came into his heart, and he knew no more. And he sort of passes out from grief there, and after a while he comes to, and he sort of agonizes a long time over what he's going to do next, because he thinks Frodo is dead. And what he really wants to do is go after Gollum. There's this cool passage here as well. Now he tried to find the strength to tear himself away and go on a lonely journey for vengeance. If once he could go, his anger would bear him down all the roads of the world until he had him at last, Gollum. Then Gollum would die in a corner. Sort of awesome, like Sam revenge thing. It'd be like a cool 80s action movie or something. Sam going to Gollum.
This time it's personal.
But then he finally sort of thinks to himself that that's not what Frodo would have wanted, and he resolves to attempt and finish Frodo's task instead. With a heavy heart, he takes the ring from Frodo and starts making his way toward the tower. If you have some comments about Sam taking the ring and how it affects him, and you guys were talking earlier about how he would be the greatest of gardeners, I don't remember that part.
The greatest of whiners. Oh, it's not for me!
I just find, the false modesty is a bit grating. Oh, what would the council do? Am I really fit to take it from my master? Oh shit, but there isn't time to consult them and they're not here. What shall I do? What shall I do? That's a bit annoying. But I think his vision of himself as Samwise the Strong, the great gardener, the great... it's a cute vision. It's not an evil vision. I can't really hate him for that.
He actually almost considers going back and asking the council what to do. It's like... It's
so naive, but it's beautiful, and it's that kind of naive pure-heartedness that gets him through, right? That's exactly why Gandalf chose him for the task. So you can mock it, but in this world of darkness, that's exactly what you need to cut through all that crap. And the guy's just killed Shelob, so we give him some respect at this point. Or
he just
did, at any rate.
He just killed Shelob. You think he'd sack up and be like, yeah, I can do this? No, he's like, oh no, not me.
Yeah, but that's wonderful though, isn't it? Because if Boromir had just killed Shelob or Aragorn, they'd be so full of themselves. Like, yeah, let me flash on Jorah one more time and all this bullshit.
He loves his sword.
Yeah, so I think it's something wonderful that this greatest of evils, even the way Tolkien writes Shelob, it's always she, it's, many times the elves use this wonderful phrase to sort of cast to cast her off, but she had never been daunted by it then, and she's not daunted by it now. And yet it's this little hobbit with a stupid, not even quite a sword, who actually mortally or severely wounds her. Yeah, I have respect for Sam despite all this nonsense.
What do you guys think about the file, sort of, that does it sort of amplify according to the person that is carrying it, because it sort of flares up when Sam is in sort of hot anger, and I don't know whether she could call it a little bit more virtuous. I guess he's being a protector there.
I think it could be kind of just like the elven rope, like it called when he wanted it to come. Like he needed it to be powerful now, so it was more powerful than it was before. Something like that, maybe.
But I get the impression here that it's more powerful than it's ever been. I mean, I guess this file is made for Frodo especially, but I get the feeling that Tolkien is saying here that Sam's sort of courage here and his actions are sort of greater than pretty much anything before, because he is small and all that.
Could be.
And Shelob is driven back by, and she wasn't before by anything done like that.
I think it's just the sheer shock that anyone would do it. Isn't it? I mean, the reaction is one of shock. Like, she's quite literally taken aback.
Yeah, but it also causes unbearable pain and terror in her as well. And I get the impression that she had sort of shrugged off this sort of incantation from elves before, but this she cannot bear.
Yeah, and it's described as it's almost like a Silmaril has come into her darkness. And I guess if her very I didn't realize this before, if her very nature is to absorb light, and like her very matter is all about like gating light, there's a sort of magical light is the one, words, like it's the whole thing about Tolkien is that words matter. She's the classic case where words don't matter, like she doesn't give a shit. But light itself, this pure elvish light, that really is something strong for her.
Yeah. The light from the file is the light from the Elven Most Lovely Star, which is actually a Silmaril in space.
And the Silmarils are actually hallowed.
Yeah.
That's sort of, is it like, did Elrond's dad, did they actually put him up in the sky?
Yes, Elrond's dad.
So is it a symbolic thing, or is it like a literal thing that they made him a star? Like, or was it just in his honor, or?
Literally made him a star. His ship, they made it space-worthy.
Hyperdrive.
Don't know how. I mean his wooden ship that he used to sail across the sea, they made it fly, and he fought dragons with it.
Wait, he had a flying dragon-beating wooden ship?
Yes. This Silverinn is unfilmable.
Yeah, I mean, don't read it just for that, because that's probably like a sentence in the book. That whole thing.
Well, they did have flying ships in the latest Thor movie as well, so I don't know if it's unfilmable.
It's unfilmable because it's so chaotic and just... It doesn't work, I don't think.
That's almost like a perfect description of the latest Thor movie. It's chaotic and it almost doesn't work.
But it just jumps around so much and time goes by so fast that it's hard to even fathom how they'd make it into a movie. I could see how they could break it down, but you couldn't make the whole thing into one.
Peter Jackson can make like one scene into a whole movie, so...
It's like a TV series.
We can have like 1,000 movies.
I mean, if Peter Jackson can take one line from the script and make it a 5 to 10 minute action sequence, what's he going to do with that sort of thing?
Yeah, but just that image of a guy in like a flying dragon-killing wooden boat. I mean, I'd pay to see that.
Arundel's cool.
Can we have like a month between the last LOTR podcast and then the Silmarillion one, so that we can all read it and then...
Yeah, no worries, because my editing is getting slower and slower. Like, we just need to get this done before like the summer of sporting hell, like the World Cup, Wimbledon, the cricket. So.
It's the Super Bowl today, and I've got plans. Let's roll.
Okay, right, let's wrap this shit up. Okay. What have we got left to cover?
So
the choices of Master Samwise.
Sam puts on the ring and sort of heads toward the tower, and I guess he's seen by the red eye on the tower, and they send orcs. And Sam can understand the orcs because of the ring, and the orcs sort of go down and investigate them. And the orcs go down and investigate the scene of the battle, and they find Frodo there, and they carry him off, and Sam sort of trails them all along, eavesdropping all the while. And the two orc captains, one of them is an Uruk from Minas Morgul, and is just a normal orc from Kirithungol, and they just talk about all kinds of stuff like the war and the Nazgul and Shelob. They do a little bit of more info on Shelob, and And what else? And they make plans of like running away someplace where there aren't any big bosses, where they could be their own bosses, like make like a bandit group somewhere, I guess. And then they finally pass through the tunnels to the tower, I guess, the basement, and the door closes between them and Sam can still hear them talking, and it's revealed that Frodo isn't actually dead, but he was paralyzed by Shelob's venom, and Sam sort of calls himself a fool, but is given a little bit of hope as well. And that's the end of the book.
Does anybody else think it's a good that it's not Peter Jackson's world when Sam puts on the ring? Like, Sam puts on the ring here and, like, wears it all around. Well, in Peter Jackson's world, that would have brought that eye right down on him.
Oh, yeah.
So Sam never actually wore the ring in the movie, did he?
Yeah.
I don't think... So is it?
He had it around his neck, I don't think he...
Yeah, in the movie they don't actually show Sam taking the ring from Frodo's quote-unquote corpse. They just show him giving it back to him in the tower cell. So it's sort of a surprise there that he had it all along.
Yeah, he never actually put it on in the movie.
So I guess in the books, only the ring wraith sort of gets an amplified sense of the ring bearer when he puts on the ring, or is that in the movies only as well? Because at Weathertop, when Frodo puts on the ring, I guess they can see him.
Yeah, I think that's more because they can actually see him, like he's actually standing out to them, whereas everybody else, like they kind of see differently. So when he puts on the ring, he like pops to them. It's like, oh, that guy. But in this situation, there's nobody around to see Sam. So it doesn't, like, send out a signal, I don't think. It's like, hey, over here, this is where the ring is. I think it's less... Like, the movie, it's like, the eye's like, oh, shit, right there.
Yeah, but there's the sort of malevolent eye in the tower that I guess it sees him before, but... Well, I guess it doesn't, because they are talking about, like, a big elf warrior, but I guess they just heard the sounds of the battle and came down because of that, but Sam thinks that he was seen by the eye in the tower. I would assume that something like that, like a magical eye in a tower, that would be like programmed to see the ring, but I guess not.
I don't really think the magical eye in the tower is necessarily book canon like it is in the movie. Like in the movie, it's like, go ahead.
I don't mean the tower in Barad-dûr, but it's not Sauron that's in Cirith Ungol, it's just some kind of, I guess, malevolent intelligence that's in Cirith Ungol. You also have the same kind of thing at the Black Gate when they feel the windows staring at them even though they don't see them. And at Minas Morgul as well. I guess it's just that feeling of dread that they get that and they're not actually seen. But I guess this sort of leaves off at the cliffhanger here, this book, because we hear that Frodo is alive, but he's a captive, and then it carries over to the next book and goes all the way to the Black Gate, where the Mouth of Sauron gives them the Mithril Code, and it's a sort of a cliffhanger, and they tell that Frodo is dead, so we don't find out until very later on. So I guess that's one sort of bit of suspense that the book maintains over the movies.
Do you think it's better to put the whole Shelob thing in the next movie, so to say, as Peter Jackson did?
I think it is in this case because like almost half of the book 6, I guess, is like the aftermath, scoring of the Sire, and them just traveling around in peace almost. So they didn't put that in the movie, so I think it makes sense to give them some action here.
Plus, I guess battle scenes take longer in movies than they do in books, so like the second film is dominated by Helm's Deep, I guess. So. And also because they faff around with Faramir a lot more, like they have him taking Frodo back to sort of Osgiliath, and then that just wastes a whole bunch of time, so... I have to say, though, I was pleasantly surprised by this reread. It wasn't half as bad as I thought it was going to be, and a lot of the times, although there was less action, the language he used, like to describe these desolate lands, it's some of the most beautiful language that Tolkien uses.
Yeah, I was so surprised when he was describing the darkness in the Morgul Vale and then the darkness in the cave. They were totally different. It was amazing.
Absolutely. The darkness in the cave is more like the darkness in Moria. I love that kind of, distinctiveness of like...
Actually it describes, there was a different darkness in Moria, and there was a different darkness in the cave, and then there was a different darkness in the Morgul Vale, and they actually sound very different, and you can actually, especially this you can actually feel all of that.
But did anyone find it really painful, Peter? How did you find it? Because you were like really like whining. You were doing a total Sam.
There were no elves here. Peter should have loved it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I may have exaggerated it a little bit for comic effect, but I did find the first third of the book, I did find it like sort of so unbearably dull that it took me like a month to get started on it. But after they meet Faramir, it really picks up. I guess the Journey to the Crossroads, that's really slow as well, but just one short chapter between the cooler parts, so it's bearable.
Anyway, does anyone have any final closing comments on book 4, or are we all good?
No more walking.
No more walking. There is still walking. There's shitloads of
Until book
walking.
6. Until book 6.
And book 5 has walking.
It's just riding.
Does it? It's riding. It's the ride of the Rohirrim.
That's one of those things. I feel like Martin has that story, and he creates a world to fit the story. And Tolkien has that world, and he has stories to, like, he makes these people walk around so he can show us the world that he created. Because it's more about the world building than about the story. So.
He's far more interested in the world and the words that describe the world, and therefore the languages that created those words through history.
Yeah.
He is in the story. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
Yeah, Martin often describes this, that there are types of writers. There's gardeners and architects, and Tolkien is an architect. He sort of builds the world up first, and then he sort of puts the characters in there, and Martin, he plants seeds and uses the characters if they're relevant. And I guess that attributes to the sort of meandering style of like Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons, because he might be a little bit lost himself.
I definitely feel there's geographical stuff that just doesn't quite add up. Well, and there's timeline stuff that just probably doesn't add up with George R. R. Martin in a way that Tolkien could never have worked. It would have driven him mad to work that way.
Yeah. I mean, he kept revising and changing things, so there's inconsistencies because of that. But he'd never just deliberately leave something inconsistent and be like, nah, whatever, it doesn't matter. He'd never do that. Whereas Martin doesn't seem to do that much.
Yeah, just figuring out John and Danny and Aegon's ages is great.
Yeah. The thing is, like, I think it's possible to like both, and I appreciate both for what they do.
It's very different, but I obviously enjoy it. But yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, if no one has anything else to say, I think our fellowship has already dwindled. But once again, I'd like to thank you all for being so generous with your time, and especially on book 4. I know it was a tough slog for some of you. So. Oh, Peter, do you want to give us one Mace Tyrell, final goodbye?
This has been the Vassals of Kingsgrave, Lord of the Rings edition. Now, good week to one and all.
Oh, that's freaking awesome. Oh, brilliant. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.